Hi, David Lee here from Human Nature at Work. I'd like to share with you an excerpt from an interview that I did with Jeff Buckwalter, the CEO of the Holy Donut, about a year ago. The interview was for an article on their culture and what makes it such an amazing, uplifting culture that brings out the best in people. And even though I was really impressed by what Jeff had to say about the culture, I was even more impressed by him as a human being and a leader. And more specifically, his humility and authenticity about his journey of becoming a better leader and being willing to look at where he was falling short and being sincerely open to feedback from employees about that. And so in this excerpt, he shares a story about a courageous conversation that he had with one of his managers, where the manager gave him some really important feedback. And I hope this story encourages you to think more about, like, how do I show up as an individual in my relationships? And then if you're in a leadership position, how do I show up as a leader? Does the way I interact with people lead them to feel psychologically safe with me, i.e., willing to be candid and open and unguarded and not fear that if they say something, it'll immediately be put down, mocked, judged, or there'll be payback behavior later. I actually, when you hear this story, just a FYI, I actually did a follow-up interview with Jeff and the gentleman he tells a story about, Tristan, and I'll be sharing that recording later. It was really fascinating to hear the two of them talk about that situation. So for now, let's hear Jeff, and here's to you letting it be a catalyst for you to do some self-reflection.
Yeah, well, I think, as I've given this some thought prior to the interview, it's just I want to make sure that you're aware that, I'm just still at the very beginning of my journey of learning how to provide a psychologically safe work environment. And I have to admit that for certainly most of my management career, I did not do that. And so I just want to make sure we're, conducting this interview under the right pretenses, and that I don't profess to be an expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm really learning how to do that better by looking, frankly, at just how poor of a job I did at that for most of my management career. So,
I love that. Honestly, I appreciate that. Yeah.
I think what I found was that, I was very impatient. And lacked tolerance for errors that people made. And I carried that from my previous positions that weren't terribly psychologically safe environments, or whether that was my upbringing where patience was not there in spades. And so I found myself carrying that into this role. And a few of my employees, had the courage to bring that to my attention and say just how negatively that was impacting them. And so I guess, I say that to just, a couple years ago, I don't think there would be an appropriate conversation for us to have, because I don't think I would have been doing a very good job at that. And so I found that, the environment and the culture and the company that we wanted to create, that hasn't changed for me. But I had to realize that what I was doing or behaving or the decisions I was making were counter to that.
I love it. Can you give an example or two of an employee having the courage to speak up?
Yeah. Tristan, our GM here, was given a write-up for really something that wasn't his area of responsibility, and also wasn't, his manager hadn't shared with him some of the budgetary shortfalls. And so, being the impatient guy that I was, I said, Sean, what's going on here? Tristan needs to be written up for this. And Sean at that moment didn't say, well, let me tell you the full story behind this. And so Tristan, asked me out to lunch and said, I really believe that what transpired there was unfair. And didn't feel like, him or our management team were allowed to make mistakes. And that really was my fault. I was not being clear enough on expectations. And I certainly wasn't providing bumpers for people to err within, right? To fall down, skin your knee, and be okay, right? And be safe. And what I had, kind of always asked and was frustrated that wasn't taking place were people taking those necessary calculated risks in their roles to become better. Even though I was asking for that, right? The reality was it wasn't happening because of my behavior, because I was impatient or because somebody might make an error. And then there was punitiveness around that. And I had to swallow hard and own that and understand that the reality was that I was the problem. And I had to look really hard at how I was behaving and the decisions that I was making in order to ensure that we are creating the environment that I really wanted to create, but my impatience and my intolerance for mistakes were ruling the roost. And so it was, that was a tough conversation for him to have with me, and it was a tough pill for me to swallow and to hear, but I absolutely needed to hear it. And that really, that really slapped me in the face, and all the while, here I am, new to the role of being a CEO, still making way more than my fair share of mistakes, right? And so there was a very real double standard taking place there. That, how can I be making the mistakes that I'm making as a leader and not allow for my people to be making their own mistakes so that they can grow and learn? And so that was a pretty powerful awakening. And then circling back with other managers, Sean, I would...
Actually, before we get to Sean, this is great. Did Tristan also, so one thing Tristan said about you not allowing us to make mistakes and grow, did he also challenge you on the not being clear about the bumpers and the parameters?
I don't think he really brought that to my attention. I think that was, those things came after a little bit. Sean certainly had mentioned that. And, moreover, I think it's really been the hiring in the last year or so of Jen Horton, and Ryan Howe, our director of operations, that really have, provided me a deeper education around what that means to remove the gray, and to be really clear around expectations and be really clear about where those bumpers are at, and encouraging them to really take calculated risks that are on culture within their job description, and to understand that there's an error or a mistake, that it's not the end. I think historically I've been quick to not give people opportunities to make mistakes and maybe remove them from their roles when they did. And it's not conducive to a psychologically safe environment at all.
And are you comfortable sharing more of your process? So when Tristan said this to you, because as it's easy. It's easy, especially if you're in a position of power, whether it's a parent or the head of an organization, to just make it about the other person and not own our part of it. So I'm curious, was that a street? You said it's a tough pill to swallow. Did you find yourself being mad at Tristan, how dare he, or was it just
no,
oh man, I screwed up?
It was the latter. I couldn't have been more proud of him and thankful. That's something that I needed to hear. And so, yeah, it was very much, I was embarrassed, I'll be very honest, that somebody as quality as he would feel the way he did, based upon, my own impatience and knee-jerk reactions to things. And so, I knew my own shortcomings, still as a CEO and a leader, and I still have them to this day, I'm sure. But I really needed somebody who I, respected and trusted to say, hey, wait a minute, that's not right, right? And you're not helping me grow and develop by making those decisions. And so I was terribly appreciative.
What would How did he say it in a way, even though the message was hard, how did he say it in a way that made it hearable and not feel like shaming or attacking or anything like that?
Well, Tristan himself is just a kind soul. So I don't think he would ever have a delivery that was anything other than thoughtful and professional. And so this was, a year and a half ago or so I'm trying to recall the exact phrasing. But he just said, I need you to, I have something to say that I need for you to hear. And, the way in which he presented it was accurate, it was fair, and then it's, some of the things I've always kind of said to people that maybe I wasn't also, kind of walking the talk was, I want you to speak your truth, be professional, make sure your delivery is professional, make sure what you're saying you've given critical thought to, and it's in the best interest of our company's well-being. And show me that, if there's a problem that you're presenting, that you have thought about a solution, and you'll always be okay. Right? That was the message that I've said since I've gotten here, but I hadn't always backed that up with the right behavior and decisions. And so I wasn't, I was saying one thing and doing another, and he kind of brought that to my attention, and he was right. And so I had to really, I own it.
And you were starting to say, I think, something about, was it Sean?
Yeah, Sean. I guess one of my MOs with Sean historically was, we would have a heated discussion about something going on in the stores, and my expectation, wrongfully so, was for him to tone that down and go back to the store level. And so he said, well, maybe if you don't want me reacting that harshly to our staff, that maybe you could find a different way to say those things to me. And he was 100% right. And it was just I was doing the do as I say, not as I do thing, which was just awful. And so, understanding my impact, I think I underestimated that. Just exactly, how important the words that I chose, my body language, and just how I reacted to particularly, mistakes or things going awry. I was a little bit oblivious to that, to be very honest. And so I really had to do a better job at composing myself and making sure that when, news that was maybe a little bit unsavory or that indicated that maybe things weren't going as well as we needed them to, that really required a very thoughtful and measured response that I was giving at that. Or historically, I wasn't doing that, right?